Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fkthry podcast. This is Joel.
And I am Mike.
If I make any weird sounds, that's Mike's fault. I have the hiccups, which I'm trying to suppress. But if he says something really stupid and I laugh and I get really weird hiccups, that's what's going to happen. So just a PSA out of the gates.
They've been extremely explosive as of late, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I guess it is the fundamental, everlasting, lifelong question of what is better, MIDI or audio?
Yeah, and I think for everybody listening, because we have some people that are less technical, let's kind of go into what the basics are of each of those options. Like, for example, MIDI is, it's like what's a good example of, what's a good analogy for MIDI?
MIDI is...
It's like sheet music almost, but for computers.
Yeah.
So it's like you're writing down the instructions for the computer to perform that sound, whereas audio is very self-explanatory. It's like sampling. You just play the sound. And if you get into it when you're producing, there's kind of two ways. If you go with MIDI and you start off that way, you kind of have the flexibility to be able to change the notes afterwards. Change the you can write a whole set of notes or a whole melody, and then you can just change the instrument you want later. So it's much more flexible.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think the thing where it comes in, the biggest for that question is when we're talking about things like samplers and stuff like that. So, when we're dealing with drums, there's a lot of people who will do all their things in drum racks. And then there's a lot of people who will just do only audio samples on a timeline. So what do you tend to prefer?
So I definitely started off with just samples on the timeline, or timeline being you just drop in the drum here, and that's when you're going to hear it. That way you just copy it. The downside of that, though, is when you want to change that drum, you have to redo all the sequencing. So that's a bit of a pain. And so I started that way, but then I pretty quickly moved into doing MIDI, and I use samplers now. Samplers and drum racks. That being said, it's slower to do things. So it slows down the creative process. So I actually don't limit myself entirely to samplers. If I just am get the beat down, get it done, I just drop it in. So a lot of times I'll have one or two channels that are just audio, some loops, but then the core of my kick drums and the stuff that I use that I built is all samplers with MIDI tracks.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for me, I remember there was a time when I tried to do everything in MIDI, because the interesting thing about MIDI is that it offers the potential to give you as much control as possible, but at the same time, it seems to almost make it take longer, even though you have more control. In that sense, if I have a drum and I drop it in and I want to edit the decay time of that drum, if it's just a sample on the timeline, I can just go into it and just draw a volume envelope or whatever.
Yeah.
And especially that's super handy if it's one single drum that I want changed the length of. Not to mention you can have multiple different drums on one, in a row, on the grid, in front of you, and you can actually see the waveform of the sample instead of everything just being a dot. So that's handy. But if you're dealing with a drum rack or whatever, and you're okay, you're writing on the piano roll, and then all of a sudden you're okay, I want this, snare to be a quicker decay time. You have to go back out into the drum rack. You have to go to the drum rack, find where that sample is, click on it, go find the decay time to it. You have to navigate through 5 different menus, and then draw automation to make it do that.
Exactly.
So, eventually it kind of got to the point where I started using it less and less for things that needed more specific attention for the detail and editing of specific drums, and then I kind of ended up moving towards just using MIDI for things that I know are going to be the same every time, which will be the kick drum, the main snare drum, and some of my hi-hats, and everything else kind of ends up being audio now at this point.
Yeah, so that's really similar to me in that, I went from samples, but very not, 'cause I didn't really know how to use most of those tools, and then I went to MIDI, but now I'm pretty flexible. I'd say for house, one of the benefits that I like with MIDI is I'll have a drum rack with, the piano roll of all of the different notes for each of the instruments, for example, snares and hi-hats. And it lets you see the grooves and then just slide them up and down. So you can just grab all those notes and move them down one MIDI note, and it's now a new hi-hat sample. Plus, I'll have all the different hi-hat grooves that House has, which is really not that many. And I'll just it's enough that you can easily fit them in like
all 3 grooves.
Exactly. Well, and you can add the auxiliary percussion as well. That adds a lot more layers. But you can actually have those on empty samplers at the bottom of your drum rack. And that means when you load your drum rack on, you can just go grab all those grooves. I mean, you can do that with the groove thing as well, but I find it's really easy to just copy that MIDI, Control C, Control V, and then just move the MIDI to the channel I like. So I find that really helps, but I'm moving to using loops more and more, making my own loops, just chopping and splicing those. Are you mainly using MIDI for instruments as well then, or are you switching more to samples for that?
Well, yeah, that's kind of the interesting thing as well, because like if you're using your own instruments, obviously like you want that MIDI control from the beginning, because everybody wants like full control of any patch that they're using, right? Like if you had to choose over using like one sample you found versus actually having the instrument that made that sample, I would choose the instrument every time. But it definitely only stays in MIDI for as long as I need it to, which in some cases is like it'll still be in MIDI by the time I render the project. But in other cases, I will get to a certain point where I'm like, hey, I'm done with the MIDI part of this. I'm tired of looking at just dots on a screen, and I would rather see the actual waveform, and then I'll just print it out and then start working with it from audio instead and start resampling down into different chains. So I don't know like what is necessarily better. I remember watching a video a long time ago. I can't find it because I've actually looked for it since then. But someone said audio actually sounds better than MIDI. But I don't know if that's entirely true. I think that it should be the same, right?
I think it is the same, but what they're probably getting at is, and it's funny that you don't really think about this until later on in your mixing. When you're doing really complicated mixing, you got a lot of sounds. But being able to see the actual waveform is got to be one of the most useful tools that there is, especially 100%. With drum sounds. You know, if you're layering a kick and two kicks, being able to, especially the new crossfade tool in Ableton 10, being able to just drag that back and then just, you overlap both of those envelopes and then you're off to the races. And the fact that that's so quick, whereas with a sampler you have to go in, find the attack knob, and then you got to pull it, but you're doing it by ear because you can't actually see the waveform.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So
yeah, exactly. And so that's so interesting. Because like you can do the same thing with both processes, but I think the thing is like MIDI in theory can be cleaner, because I mean if you can do everything on a drum rack, then you can do all your drums on one channel. But do you really want to mix all your drums by having to like go into the drum rack, find it, go scroll halfway down the chain and like figure out what you need to adjust, and then again sort of doing it mostly by ear, which like you should be using your ear most of the time anyway. But at the end of the day, it's not that much different than just having like 10 channels for your drums as opposed to having 10 samples loaded into a drum rack that you have to like navigate through, right?
Yeah, well, I think by cleaner you mean like cleaner your project file, not sound.
Yes, like it'll look cleaner. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can pretty much achieve the same quality with both. I think that's not really much of an argument. It's more that I think what we're trying to talk about is like which one affects your production process, right? Like the best way, which one should you be using in which situations? So like when you're trying to be really quick or you're trying to make really complicated sounds, audio often works better. And I wanted to kind of move into resampling because I think, what was it, 3 years ago, you were like, hey, you should learn what resampling is. And that was a rabbit hole that I went down for a long time. And I've moved back to being more MIDI, especially when it comes MIDI, not MIDI. There it is. when it comes to sounds, drums, I use that as well. But with sounds, I'm moving back to that just because I like to have the flexibility. But there's some sounds you just can't really make you can never even think of them with like real time processing, meaning like it's being synthesized when you play.
100%. Yeah, like you're not gonna try and do everything from literally just one sine wave. I mean, maybe you would probably, but like you're not gonna just drop a sine wave sample in there and then drop all of your effects in a row and then like try to process it with like automation for every single thing. Like that's when a synth would probably be a lot easier to use for sure.
Yeah.
But going back to what you said about how it's nice to be able to see the waveforms. That's like one of the biggest things I end up telling people when I'm giving them advice and stuff is like bounce your shit down from MIDI, because MIDI can be extremely deceiving. You
Yeah.
know, like
Oh yeah.
for some reason, like it'll say, you know, like you play something out of MIDI and it says it's this volume, right? And then you bounce it out and you look at it and the waveform is like tiny or not shaped the same way that you think it is, just based off of watching your volume faders go up and down. And so as soon as you bounce it out, it's like you can see exactly what's going on in your waveform down to like the actual phase correlation of it. So you can definitely make a lot better judgment calls based off of looking at the waveform than you can off of looking at a piano roll, I think.
Well, definitely, and especially if you don't have, a perfect studio, and most of us don't have these dream studios where you can hear every single detail.
Yeah.
If you got a big project, man, it's essential to be able to hear and see everything. You got to be able to do that as a process. And to be fair, most people do that at the mix down stage. When you pull all those things, but you can actually bring that a step earlier into your actual production as well. There's no real reason with Ableton. It's pretty easy to freeze a track, and then flatten it and just create a duplicate below it. And then if you ever need to go back, you actually end up you still have best of both worlds. You got the MIDI and the sample, and you can always jump back to it. But I find that sometimes it's worth just kind of locking it down to being audio only.
Yeah, not only for like just like a visual representation of it too, but also just kind of like a time to move forward with the sound sort of thing.
Exactly.
Bouncing it down, it just really helps you like solidify those choices and kind of like move on to something else.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that's really the other big thing as well, and it's kind of it's a technique. It's definitely a technique thing, like with house music and with a lot of hip hop, right? They're just sampling a track, and that's the vibe. They're really not doing a lot when it comes to, you're not doing very intricate music in terms of sound design, really. They're just grabbing a sample and moving it along. Do you find that, is there a specific time when you're producing where you're like, okay, I'm going to do that, but you still produce afterwards, or do you limit that kind of right to the mix down stage?
Are you talking about like spending time detailing a specific sound before moving on?
Well, you're detailing a sound, and then you're basically, okay, I don't want to work on this anymore. I want to freeze it and then be done with it. Do you find that you're able to kind of freeze that and actually be done with it? Do you have a process there where
I'm so bad at that.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem that I have is I will work on one sound until that sound is my idea of perfect in the context of the project, which is actually, like, I think not a great strategy, but it ends up kind of being what I end up doing a lot of the time.
Well, and it's not always bad, especially if you're trying to find sounds. If you're not really sure what you want the sound to be, sometimes it is better to keep going, because you got to keep iterating on it. But from a speed perspective, I think sampling is definitely quicker if you're able to use it in kind of like final sounds and be like, hey, I'm not going to adjust this one anymore, and just stick with the audio, because you're not actually saying you're done. Like if you're working on a collab with somebody, you send them mostly the stems. And you're still able to work on the song, no problem. You're just working with audio instead of MIDI. And then if you need to change a note per se, whatever, you do that. But
and actually, I feel like I've seen a lot of this is kind of a universal technique that I've started to see throughout a lot of like collaborations that I've done, or like any project file that I've opened, and something that I definitely started like implementing. I was doing it sort of like kind of doing this a while ago, but starting to see people do it this way more now. I've started to like move towards this method, which is that what I'll see is that they have the instrument on the MIDI channel above, and then I'll get the project file, and that channel will be frozen, and then below it there will be the audio that's bounced out.
Yeah.
So they're literally like right next to each other all the time. So it'll be like MIDI audio, MIDI audio, MIDI audio, and so in those situations, it's like, even if I do need to go back to the MIDI and change something, all I need to do is change that and then just bounce it and move it back down, and then it will still run through both processing chains anyway.
Yeah.
So it's easy to get it back to where it was, even if you have multiple layers of like resampling and reprocessing, as long as there wasn't any crazy stuff done to the audio, like stretching it or reversing or whatever.
That's definitely best of both worlds, but it does duplicate the number of channels you've got. And you were saying that and I noticed this, when you actually have, I don't know if we know this for sure, but when you have larger and larger numbers of channels in Ableton, when you go to add a new one, it has to recalculate the routing every time. So if you add one at the bottom, or I think it's at the top, right? It has to, when you have, say, 100 channels, it actually has to do this big process where it goes and recalculates all the routing. And that's why you get those freezes when it comes to like adding a new channel in a bigger project. Whereas when it's new, it's like you add a new channel, boom, it's instantaneous. So.
Well, yeah, because I mean, and I think this is the case. I haven't done any extensive testing on this, but I mean, imagine this: if you're at the very bottom of a project that has like 100 channels, and you make another channel, the next channel is channel 101.
Yeah.
So if you're literally on channel 100 and you press Control T and make another channel, all it has to do is go, there's a new channel, that channel's name is 101, and it doesn't have to adjust anything else. But if you make a channel at the very top of your project file, you're saying insert a new audio channel, name this one channel 1, and change the name of every other channel in your project to like now it's all shifted down by 1. So not only does it have to reroute all of those just on your sidebar, but anything that you've got going on in the project as far as like sidechain compression or anything that's reading other channels from across other channels, it has to recalculate all of that stuff in the computer, which it does pretty quickly, but that is, I think, why you end up with those tiny mini freezes.
When it's, you can't always put channels at the bottom anyways. It happens when you're moving channels up and down as well. And, you're not going to be like, oh, every channel is going to be at the bottom of the project because I want it to run quickly. Like, you've got to bust them together in groups. And it just, you got to do it that way. So, imagine if you just did a project where you never organized any of the channels. It would be so bad.
Oh, God. I feel like that's probably exactly what most of my projects look like back from when I first started.
Oh, yeah. I still have a few that are like that, but most of my stuff is organized now.
Man, the very first song, this is a little bit of a tangent here, but the very first song that I ever made in Ableton was 11 minutes long.
Tool inspired?
Not really.
What?
Like, it was like an electro house song. I had like 3 drops.
Do you have it?
And what's that?
Do you have the song?
I do, actually.
Okay, you should send it to me offline so I can hear it.
I will. I can send. I don't know if I can send it to you right now. I might be able to
afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that
Right now. But afterwards, I need to hear this.
It's bad.
Some of my stuff is terrible. I told you about that one I made. I think it was 7 years ago, and I had no idea about I didn't even know what volume was, and it was just like clipping really hard in the build, super loud, and the drop was just like 10 dB quiet. But it wasn't even a drop. It was just like the most boring crap I've ever made.
Oh God, yeah, no, I remember that too. Actually, funny enough, Lou, he was showing me some of his project files, and like, he was just everything was clipping all the way till the end, and then he was just bringing the volume down after the fact, and I'm like, you know that you're rendering all this digital distortion into the sound before you mix it, right? And he's like, oh, what? I thought it didn't matter where or when the volume, like just not understanding gain staging at all. And it's funny because that is something that is often overlooked. People don't really think about gain staging that way.
No.
But yeah, try to not do that.
Oh, that's actually a benefit of having audio as well. Looping us right back. Having audio samples, you're pretty much always going to have, you're never going over 0, right? I mean, can you go over 0
in
with
theory,
a sample?
you can. It's actually really interesting because of the way that the 32-bit floating point works. So if you actually take a sample that's if you take a sample and you go into it and then you just jack the volume up so that the waveform goes way past
beyond it,
the lines. If you consolidate that clip, it will still know that information is up there. Okay. And so it will normalize and it will bring it back down so that it doesn't actually clip any of the waveform. However, if you do the same thing and you boost that sample up and then you actually resample it onto a new channel, it will render the clipped audio instead.
Okay, so if you record it in versus consolidating, like I guess it's a different process, and
if you consolidate it, it keeps the information.
So does it turn it down then? So it like basically does it's like reverse
it does.
makeup.
It will turn it back down.
Huh.
Or what it will do actually is it will
compress it, right?
No, it doesn't change the sound at all. So what it does is it'll actually normalize it so that if you double click where the volume is, when it sets it to 0, the highest peak will just be touching 0. So like when you consolidate it, if it's way like boosted like that, instead of it like rendering and then saying it's 0 volume, it will actually render telling you it's already plus 11 or whatever.
I know exactly because it actually adjusts the volume knob. It doesn't because I've noticed that happening. So say you render it, it'll actually render it, and then it'll show it at like minus 11.
Yes, correct.
Exactly.
So it's normalizing it for you.
Yeah, but it's not actually changing the sample. It just turns down the volume knob on the sample itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, what a nice little tangent there.
Yeah.
Did you want to get into resampling a bit and like the power of dealing with samples? Because that's something that we, I think we use heavily in like all of our music.
Definitely. Resampling, I think, is like it's like one of the biggest game changers when it comes to like trying to find good or new sounds, because like I find like, you know, back in the day when I was trying to like make all these crazy sounds and stuff, I would always kind of get to a certain point and then it would just kind of be like flat. Like it wouldn't live up to the expectations, excuse me, that I wanted. And it's because I was trying to do so many things out of just the synth itself, you know? Like you get whatever it might be, operator, massive, serum. You do everything inside the synth, so you're like using serum and you're like, hey, I've used like all my wavetables, my noise and my filters, and like I've gone through all the effects, and it's like, why doesn't it sound like amazing, super polished,
super
like finished sound right out of the synth? And it's like, that's just not how it works. You know, if you want something that is like really deep, most of the time you need to go into some crazy resampling, which means like you're processing it heavily after the synth. And then you know, specifically resampling is kind of interesting because in theory you don't need to resample it down. You could just keep adding more and more and more and more processing. But I think what happens is you get to a point where your processing chain is so long and ridiculous that you're like, okay, I need to look at this as if it was one thing now.
Exactly.
So then
it simplifies it.
Bounce it down. Yeah. And then start going again.
Well, I think I have an interesting analogy for it. So think about like a sound is like it's like an environment, right? You know, there's all the things that are associated. So imagine you start with a sine wave, you're in a room that's like the sine wave. When you're in a synth, you have all these doors, which are kind of the options you can use, and you can choose anyone. You can start with a square wave, start with a saw wave. And then, you know, with some of the synths, you have more options. So you can go through one door and then you can go through the next door, add a reverb, and you keep going. But at a certain point, there's not really any more options. Every synth has a set of limitations in terms of how many layers you can go deep, unless you're using phase plant, which is another story. But say serum, you know, you only have so much you can do. You have 2 synths before you start having to resynth or resample.
Yeah.
So with resampling, you know, it's like you're in a room and you have all these doors. And you can go through any one of them, use any of the tools you want to do, and then, okay, you're now at a new sound. And you can just do that infinitely. So you just keep going. You're just instantly going, and then you just, okay, this is where I am now. And that's, okay, what do I want to do now? And you can just keep evolving the sound layer after layer after layer. And there really isn't any reason why you have to stop. So that's the difference is, you know, with the synth, you kind of have these limitations. You can only go so far. But with resampling, it's like this infinite loop where you're just diving deeper and deeper down these, you know, these paths that can be whatever you want.
Yeah, and I mean, even going back into the synth as well, if you wanted to, because you could process this sound like, you know, with a million different things, and then take this new sound, bounce it out, and then put it back into the synth as if it was the wavetable from the beginning, right? And you're starting there from square one. Like it's literally endless. And also, the one thing that you get access to is actual audio manipulation that you can't do with just the processing, which is like time stretching and
you can get kind of close with granular, but it's just not as easy. It's with audio directly. Anybody that hasn't used the Ableton texture, it's like what are they called? The
tones, the warping algorithms.
The warping algorithms in Ableton. Those are a gold mine in themselves. You know, just duplicate the length of a sound, use texture, and you essentially get granular synthesis right there with the sample. Remember when you showed me that, I blew my mind. It's like, wow, I could just do this to every sound, and I just kept dragging it out and expanding. It's like you're diving into a sound.
Yeah, and then the crazy thing is like you can stretch it to its maximum length and then consolidate it and then stretch it more if you want, right? So you can just keep doing that over and over again, just render and consolidate, render, stretch, render, stretch, render, stretch, and then you end up with like one sound, like one kick drum sound that's like 20 minutes long now. It's like what's hidden down there?
Just slowly a sine wave pitching down super slow. Sorry, my throat's really struggling right now. Those hiccups really did a number on me earlier.
Yeah. Let's have a little water break here.
Yeah.
Here we go.
But yeah, I remember that's when you showed me that pretty much changed, because I never really thought about that. You know, with coming from Logic, unless, I mean, I didn't know about it, but Logic's audio manipulation was kind of trash, at least from my experience. They were like, oh, just load it into ES2, which is the sampling tool, and Google it. It's literally the dumbest sampler you've ever seen. One of the big reasons why I can't, like, it's got one of those really, really bad interfaces that's like old 3D from 1995.
Oh no. Oh, that's what it is?
Yeah, that's the default sampler in Logic, at least when I last used it. I was using Logic 10, I believe,
doesn't even look like a sampler. It looks like it looks like a really bad MIDI synth.
Is it ES2? Maybe it isn't ES2. I think
no, ES2 is that weird. No, that couldn't possibly be ES2.
I think. Well, maybe I'm thinking the wrong one, but there's a really bad sampler that is just it's horrendous.
EXS24.
That's the one. Yeah, it looks worse than ES2. I think
it does actually.
Yeah. So
it's not very user friendly.
No, and when you load a sample in, it like loads it for a single MIDI note, and then you have to like go in and stretch it so that it's across the keyboard.
Oh my god!
You know the key range in sampler, how like by default it's like it'll be C3, and when you play it, all that stuff. Yeah, but yeah, that's why I came from MIDI originally, because Logic didn't have this kind of stuff. Whereas with Ableton's like, oh, you have a sound, okay, just do whatever you want to it. So
yeah. That's the one nice thing for sure. But on the other hand, Logic has a lot more options when it comes to MIDI editing. Though I've never needed them. You know, because I've had my friends like show me, like they're like, yeah, like in Logic you have way more options with MIDI editing. Like you can do things like slice all of your MIDI notes into like different things, and like you can but even then it's still not user friendly. Like you still have to go to like a menu. It's like using Photoshop. You know, it's like using Photoshop versus Microsoft Paint. Like you have to actually like know how to fucking work the program and like look through a bunch of different menus and then like click the right thing and like hope that something was highlighted properly, and then it will do the thing you wanted it to. So like those options are there, but they're not exactly accessible easily. Whereas Ableton, you're just like click, do whatever you want, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I can't imagine that kind of a process would lend itself to being very musical either. You know, it's like
it doesn't feel like it would.
Got to go in, drag it out, and like be able to slice a MIDI note into smaller MIDI notes is like handy, but it's also pretty easy to just like shorten it, Control D, Control D, Control D. So like Ableton is like simpler, more of a basic level, and it's really powerful if you kind of learn the tricks. I remember when
I've definitely never, and that's the one thing actually, funny enough, I was having a conversation with someone on someone else's stream a while ago, and they're like, oh, maybe I should switch to Ableton. And I'm like, straight up, like I've seen many people switch to Ableton. I've never seen someone switch out of Ableton.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's
I don't know, kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah. Thank you, Ableton devs. I guess it's actually called Live, isn't it?
It technically, yes,
but
it is called Live.
Ableton, but
yeah, because it's able to and do anything.
Anyways.
I wonder if that's why they called it that.
Who was that guy who said Ableton? There was one guy who did like a tutorial online. And
I have no idea.
He's like, "Welcome to my Ableton tutorial." And he just
one time I was looking up a ukulele tutorial, and he says, "Remember to hold your ukulele."
That almost sounds like intentional.
Ukulele.
I said Chihuahua once. It was like grade 6, to be fair. I mean, to be fair, it kind of looks like that.
A Chihuahua. You're not wrong.
Yeah. Anyways,
every time I've ever seen one, I'm like, oh, Chihuahua.
Yeah, totally.
So MIDI is a lot like an ukulele, and audio is a lot more like a Chihuahua.
Exactly. I mean, you're really you're making it really concise and clear. That's if there's anything you can take away from this conversation, that's definitely it.
Yeah, small guitars versus small dogs.
Yeah, the world is just full of small inanimate objects, except for dogs are not inanimate.
Dogs are totally animated.
I couldn't think of the word, but that's what came out.
Non-human personified objects.
Exactly. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk about. This is something that I've been actually starting to mess with more about sampling. Mm-hmm. When you actually start a song from a sample. So this is different than I feel like you don't do this too much in your production, but I've actually been writing pieces and then just sampling them. So recording them down to audio and then using those as my own samples, if that makes sense. And not like a drum sample, but like an actual loop. So I've been making my own performance loops. I'll make a hip hop song or a chill hop thing, and then I'll actually sample that and then use that in another song.
That's actually really smart. EPROM does something very similar to that. I remember watching one of his streams where he was kind of going about his process, and basically what he does is he'll make a kind of a pseudo loop thing that's just very simple. Actually, rather, what he was doing is he'd make 3 or 4 kicks that were layered with a bass sound or some sort of sound, and then a couple snares that were layered with the same thing, the sound. and then throw those into a drum rack and then play a groove on it. So like when he hits one kick drum, it'll be like one bass sound, and then you hit a snare drum and it's like a response sound. So you can kind of make a groove out of hitting different kicks and different snares. And then he'd make like a sort of half-assed loop out of that, resample that loop, and then throw that whole loop into a granulator and then play that to get some crazy ass sounds. And so that's kind of like resampling your own shit too, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of that's kind of where I'm trying to go towards. It's that, you know, there's certain techniques of production that are like a layer above just simply producing. It's like you're producing stuff and then you're resampling that whole production into like another thing. And G. Jones does a really good job of it. And EPROM you're talking about as well. Those kind of sounds where they're really glitched out. I think a lot of the time that's what they're doing. They're almost using like DJ effects on a track, and then they're throwing that into the track itself. So, and because some of the stuttering, like I think the Mr. Bill track you've been working on, I feel like that glitch breakdown is a similar technique, right? You basically made a bunch of little things.
Yeah, so that's kind of what it was. Yeah, exactly. So like you'll write like a simple like a loop. Well, it's not really simple, but it's like a different idea every couple bars. But then instead of just leaving it straight like that, you'll take like the end of one of them and then duplicate it to stutter over into the next bar every couple times, and then that will make it sound like you're almost using like a beat repeat. Yeah. Which is kind of cool because when you use DJ effects into a song, you're really kind of breaking the fourth wall that way, because you're doing something that you couldn't do in theory unless the song was already finished and then being performed live. Yeah. So to take that concept and put it into the production, you're breaking the laws of physics, you know what I mean? Because you're doing something that couldn't have been done unless the thing that comes after it was done first. Does that make sense?
It totally. And that's kind of why I was saying it's like it's producing at a higher level, and that's what I was trying to get at. It's like it's not higher level like it's harder. It's just from an abstraction layer. You're actually writing a whole song, and then you're then glitching that whole song into like itself. And so that I think that from my perspective, that some of those kind of tracks are my favorite when it comes to the really complicated, really cool stuff, because it's just you're listening to the song, you're like, whoa, my brain just got like torn apart, because you're in the song, and then it just like rips out of the song and then rips back in. Like, and that's some of the, I think the trick there is really using audio and actually bouncing down whole sections of your track and then manipulating it after the fact, because you cannot get those effects. The whole track will be glitched out. There's just no way you can do that with
too many things. You'd have to do too much automation. You have to copy too many things over. It's much easier to bounce it down. And actually, funny enough, when I do things like that in my track, I actually bounce everything I have into a bus that I call the fourth wall bus, and then I will do all my weird after effects in that. But again, the most difficult part about that is like when I want to implement those effects, I have to make sure that the stuff that I'm bouncing down into that is already like at a point where it's pretty much done and mixed. Otherwise, like if I wanted to add another instrument to that section, I'm going to have to rebounce out that whole thing and then redo those glitch effects to get that new instrument into that spot that it's supposed to be in.
Yeah, and let alone writing a new, like changing the notes.
Exactly.
You really can't pitch a lot of that stuff. Anymore. That's when it's really complicated as well. If there's a bunch of reverb, pitching reverb is like a big no-no. My book sounds pretty bad. I've tried it a couple times, but
pitching reverb. What do you mean by pitching reverb?
Well, like a big reverby sound, and you just pitch it up.
It can sound weird. You definitely got to do it on like non-warp algorithm stuff. Like you got to just like pitch the time up so that it actually speeds the whole thing up.
Yeah, I guess if you use repitch, it's probably not the end of the world. But if you use even with Complex and Complex Pro,
it sounds bad.
I think what it's doing is it's picking up on the white noise and trying to like apply the algorithm, and you can hear like the digitalness on it, and reverb should not sound like that.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds weird, and it's actually really funny because like, hold on, I just gotta turn this heater thing off. It's really annoying.
No problem.
Like, it's funny because I've grown to hate that sound so much that I can recognize it right away, because it sounds kind of like really bad compression on like an old video. You know what I mean? Like way back in the day when you'd like the audio just gets completely destroyed by the video compressing down to like 280p. Or something, you know what I mean? It just sounds all watery. So it's kind of like along those lines. But like I had one of my students, he was like stretching a white noise risery sample thing, and he was stretching it on Complex Pro, and I'm like, I can hear this digital weirdness in it like immediately, and it's like You might think that's cool, but I'm telling you right now, it's not, because everyone recognizes that sound, and we know that you're warping it on the wrong algorithm.
Definitely.
And it's just weird.
And I think I'd actually be interested to dive into. That's definitely a rabbit hole that I should look into, like how those algorithms are actually written from like a code standpoint, because I'm sure they're pretty interesting. But I think what's happening is they're designed to pick up on pitches, right? So they're designed to go after like a pitch, and then they actually are doing some kind of, it's because it's all granular, right? Like that's really the only thing you can do, but they can just make it sound better. So it's granular with some tricks. And I think when you provide white noise to it, it just wrecks it, because basically it's trying to find a pitch in the white noise, and what you're hearing is like the algorithm scanning around trying to find a pitch, but it can't. So
I think what's happening is with complex, it's dividing all the frequency ranges into specific grains and then picking the closest next one to fill in the blanks. So when you're speeding a sound up, you're just cutting out samples. You don't need to worry about it as much. But when you're slowing a sound down, the computer has to guess what is going to go in those blank spots that don't have any sound in it, right?
Exactly.
So it's just grabbing the closest thing based off of like a specific grain size on Complex Pro or on Complex. But on Complex Pro, what I believe happens is you've got the those two knobs, the envelope and the formant. So the envelope knob is actually a crossover band to where the white noise section is. So what happens is it's
for which one?
So
Pro?
On Complex Pro, the envelope one it's literally the crossover point of white noise. So what happens is it's taking everything below that crossover point and shifting it using the complex algorithm. But then everything above that point, it shifts it with complex algorithm, but then it formant shifts it back up. That actually might be the reverse. I think that is the reverse. It shifts the white noise stuff down normally, and then it'll take everything below that, put it down, and then formant shift it up or down, which is why you can pitch vocals on Complex Pro, and it will sound more like a natural voice instead of getting that weird, like, low robotic sound.
Because actually holding some of those harmonics, it's keeping the harmonics intact, and the timbre of the harmonics, it's keeping those intact. And then and then it's not messing
But what
up
happens
on that.
is,
Interesting.
if it were to formant shift the whole thing up, then you get that weird shitty sound in the high end. It doesn't sound natural. So what it does is it's essentially only formant shifting up the part of it that you want, which is why it gives you that control over the envelope and the formant amount, so that you can kind of like dial it in to sound closer to the natural tone of what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, so
but it ends up sounding really bad on actual songs. Which is funny.
Yeah, I use Complex for my live set for tracks.
Yeah, you gotta.
But I was going to say, my favorite is actually Texture. I figured we'd go into it and chat about them a little bit because they're all pretty interesting. Texture is basically direct granular synthesis. You've got, what's the other knob? There's the pitch knob, right? So like how much you're doing to it, and then the only knob you can do is the grain size. So it's basically
and the flux.
What is the flux again?
So the flux is actually similar to the spray knob, and what that's doing is it's vibrating the actual amount.
What's the spray? You're just saying the spray knob.
It's like when you, you know, the thing on the end of your hose when you change it to like, you know, fan or jet. It's just similar to that.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
It's funny enough, it kind of does. So what the spray knob is the one on grain delay, which is actually adding a modulation to the grain size. So what happens is if you turn the flux up, it will flutter the grain size back and forth over a certain degree. So if you're bending something like white noise, if you turn the flux up more, it will sound more natural and it will sound less computerized. But if you turn the flux all the way down, then you get exact grain delay. So you get that like, right? But with flux on, it's more like it stutters, right? It's like kind of weird.
Yeah, it's not consistent.
Yes. So it sounds more wet. It'll sound more wet with the flux up.
Especially for white noise, yeah. Well, so that one's fun too, because with any granular synthesis, if you shorten the time down enough, so once you get below like 50 milliseconds or whatever, you essentially start turning into a pitch.
Yes.
And so you can basically repitch tracks. The only problem with that is you lose all ability to, be in key. It's like, okay, it's just
you really have to do it by ear.
Whatever it is. So, although there's a lot of types of music that does not matter. So,
yes,
my favorite thing to do is to automate the grain size. That's like my favorite thing in Texture. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't use tones that often.
Tones is really good for any sort of static note that is like especially like bass notes with any sort of like upper harmonic frequencies on it. If you're stretching those and you use tones mode, it will actually keep it more consistent.
Okay.
Yeah, it's easier to keep the pitch at whatever the pitch was.
Do you have to dial it in with the tone knob?
I don't usually ever have to change it that much.
Interesting.
Yeah, surprisingly. It doesn't seem to affect it that much. Like it is a grain size knob again, but it doesn't.
It doesn't, and it also goes in steps too. Like it seems like it changes in steps almost.
It will if the pitch is changing. So that's the thing is like if it's a consistent like one note, then tones mode is really good for one long note. But if you're working with like many notes and harmonies and like things that are shifting up and down, it'll sound weird and steppy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then beats mode, last one.
Yeah. Beats is cool because you basically, well, I almost never leave it on transients because it's kind of hard to really do it properly.
Yeah.
But it's cool because you can basically turn anything. It's like an envelope that is to the clock of the track.
I heard Dr. Dre had a lot to do with making the algorithm for that one.
Dude. You actually delivered that very cleanly. Like at first I was like, wait, that's a joke, right? I couldn't really tell.
Beats mode by Dre.
Yeah, by Dre. Nice.
So no, but what beats mode does actually is it treats every transient or every slice, depending on how you set it up.
Yeah.
It treats that as if it was its own like sample on just normal unwarped like repitch mode. So if you're changing the pitch, and you'll notice this the most if you grab a drum loop and you put it on beats mode and you shift the pitch up, what happens is it will actually shorten the length of the sample from the transient point to like properly. So it is the most clean adjustment of actual sound. But then what happens is like if you're shifting it up, so it squishes that note, but then it will have dead space.
Yeah.
And then it will trigger the next one. So you've got the multiple algorithms. So the one, if you have it just gated with like the arrow with the thing, then it will play that note and then it will get to where there's no more information and it will just have silence until it sees the next transient information.
Yeah.
But it's default set to play this way and then back. So what you'll actually get is the drum sample will hit and then it's sped up. So once it gets to the end of the sample, it will start playing that sample in reverse until it gets to the next transient and then it will keep going.
That's why I normally turn it off. But you could actually almost use it as like a transient shaper as well. Almost.
Yes, you can.
You just have to repitch it, like pitch the sound up, consolidate, and then bring it back down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's super interesting. But yeah, that's the last one. Well, there's also repitch, but that's just like slowing it down on a turntable. It's like
that just actually removes your ability to change the pitch using the transposition knob, and it just pitches it based off of how you stretch it, which you can get some really interesting sounds with if you're like shifting things over, because it'll make one of them like lower, and then the next one will be like all high pitch and stuff. You can get some pretty weird artifacts if you do that too.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let this be a sales pitch for anybody that is not on Ableton yet. You can use this on any audio sample, which is really handy. You can take anything and just consolidate it into audio and then just immediately start manipulating it. And if you're a Logic user, like I used to be, it's a game changer.
Or Fruity Loops too.
Yeah, Fruity Loops. What can you do that? I've never even really looked at the
No, Fruity Loops is a nightmare, just like Logic.
Really? I feel like...
dude, it's the worst. I mean, I'm like, I shouldn't bash other programs because there's plenty of people who use Fruity Loops.
I think you just froze on Parsec 1 sec.
Okay, picking up back where we were. Yeah, Fruity Loops. Fruity Loops is also a nightmare as well. And I don't know tons about Fruity Loops because I saw someone trying to use it way back in the day, and I was like, this is not for me.
No.
But basically, like if you have audio and you want to like do anything to it like Ableton, you have to like open a plugin and then record the audio into that plugin and then go into that sampler and then do all of your editing and then save that sample as a thing, and then you have to drag it out of that plugin and then put it back into the project, and it's like
that's a big nope from me. There's no way.
Yeah, that's a hard wet no.
I already hate having to wait for Consolidate because it actually like renders the sound. I already hate doing that. If you had to wait in real time and listen to the sound every time, I would lose my mind.
Oh yeah. Every time. It's a nightmare.
Every time. Yeah. That's like using some of those. Oh, dude, I really need to get that granular synth from you again. The one that's really cool. The one that you bought.
Stream?
I think so. Yeah. Sorry, that was just a side tangent, but.
Yeah. I'll hook you up with that again.
Yeah, Fruity Loops. I haven't even looked at it. I've looked at what's the other one? The one that has. Oh, I'm totally. I don't even know.
Bitwig? Reaper?
No, maybe it is FL. Isn't there another one that's similar to FL that's not FL? It's like I don't know. I'll figure it out after. Maybe it is Fruity Loops. It has like a citrus.
Yeah, that is
It's like
that
an
is
FM.
FL.
Okay, yeah, because I actually wanted that FM synth.
But let's
on
go through the
Citrus.
list of DAWs that people use.
Okay, yeah, but I don't know anything about most of them.
Yeah, me neither. But let's just see what we can figure out. There's obviously the Ableton,
Yeah,
and then Reaper, which is like
yeah.
crazy, fucking crazy.
Oh, what's the one with the patch cords where you drag?
That's Reaper.
That's Reaper. Okay, so that's some of them. What's the name of it? This type of design where you like emulate how it was done physically, and I think that's
Yeah. So Reaper is super interesting because it's designed for people who are like really into modular synths.
Yeah.
Because it literally looks like it. It's got the patch cords and everything, and like all the routing is done that way. And there's no, I don't know if they've changed this. I think they updated, but it used to not support any VST usage. It was only like in-house stuff. You had to use only Reaper shit. So yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah. Well,
then there's like
it's probably because of the way they did the routing. So the routing was probably so integrated that to enable VSTs, it just wouldn't work. That's my guess, but
well, yeah, it makes sense completely. Honestly, like because if you wanted to route something, I mean, they could have definitely done it. It would just be like a unit, kind of like in Ableton, how it like shows up as a black thing in the bottom of the screen, and then it's like in and then out, and then you can only have the in and out, right? But
that's probably what.
That program was crazy.
Oh yeah, I'd actually be interested in trying it out. That's like for me, each DAW should have something about it that makes it interesting. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like if it's like Logic from my perspective is like a Mac clone of Pro Tools.
Yes.
They're basically the same application. Anyway, so moving on, Pro Tools is the other one. That's like what all the pros use as their main tool. Sorry, I had to.
If you didn't, I would have.
Okay. Yeah, so that's I mean it just is like a very linear DAW. So it's very similar to the Ableton, I guess the regular channels mode. What's that called? Session mode?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same as just normal.
Yeah.
No, arrangement.
Arrangement view, yeah.
Yeah, arrangement.
So it's just like
it's pretty much the same, except everything's on the other side.
And there's an argument that it sounds the best, and everybody's like, it's got the best sound, which, it probably has some special sauce, but...
Oh, you can really hear those perfect sample rate.
Especially when you're listening on like laptop speakers. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everyone can tell the difference.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that shit on Ableton. They're like, you can't make it sound as good as Pro Tools. To be fair, there is some truth to that when it comes to like the EQ. Like the EQ in Ableton is not super sampling. Good. So like the high frequencies do really weird stuff. So you should probably use something better like FabFilter Pro Q3. Mm-hmm. Shout out. But yeah, Pro Tools is like the thing that everybody uses. Plus it also integrates really well. There's like hardware by, is it Avid?
Yeah, Avid and all that stuff. We've tried to talk about it before. And we always forget the name when we're trying to bring it up. The Apollo stuff made by Avid.
No, that's UAD.
Oh, UAD. Yeah, UAD is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, UAD.
Whoops. Oh, we fucked it up again. But Avid is Pro Tools as well.
No, but Avid and Pro Tools are not the same as UAD. Those are different.
That's correct.
Yeah, yes, so they're separate. Yeah, but Avid is like they do DAW stuff. They're less with the. I think they do hardware effects acceleration as well, but I think Pro Tools doesn't have any effects itself, right? It's almost entirely you use it as a VST host, right?
I'm not 100% sure on that.
I've never actually used it.
I don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then more along the lines of like the electronic stuff, because there's a couple other programs like
Audacity,
like Pro Tools, Audacity. Yeah,
Classic.
Actually, people do use Audacity. Did you know Paul X Stretch is part of Audacity?
Really?
Yeah, that's where it came from.
That's
the
really
guy
cool.
who made Paul X Stretch also made Audacity. Paul X Audacity.
That's makes sense because it kind of looks like Windows 95. Paul X Stretch is really cool as well. Just Google it.
It
free.
Stretches things.
It's free, and there's a 64-bit VST version. You just have to go digging
Comes
for
with
it.
a guy named Paul.
Yeah, and
Paul X.
I knew you were going nowhere with it, and I tried to think of something, and I just went nowhere with it either. So,
good old Paul.
Yeah,
good guy.
Yeah. So Audacity. Sorry, I completely derailed you with saying Audacity.
No, that's okay.
Other
It's actually really
programs?
funny. I use that as a joke one time. Someone hit me up on Instagram. They were like, "Yo, what DAW do you use?" I was like, "Audacity."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh wow, that's really cool. I have to check it out." I'm like, "Oh man."
Didn't know. It's open source.
Just like the joke was like,
Yeah.
like here's them, and then here's the joke. Just like,
Yeah, I actually still use Audacity for when I'm taking my Zoom recordings and I'm editing them, because it's actually handy for that. because you
really?
need to see the waveform and then you can cut. So you just basically can cut away the crap. It's handy for taking single samples. It's not really a DAW though. It's more just like an audio editor.
Yeah. Actually, funny enough, the very, very, very first thing that second. It would be the second thing I've ever made was I used Audacity for it, and it was essentially a recreation of the Harry Potter Puppet Pals video. Except I was just saying different names of fruits over and over again, stacked on top of each other with different rhythms.
Wow. It seems like there's a whole album here of content that could be released.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. I should definitely find it.
Yeah.
Fruit song.
Yeah, so then other DAWs. If you like Ableton, but you like Linux, you can use Bitwig, which is, I think, one of the Ableton devs branched off and made one that's cross-platform. The only problem with that is I want to use Linux. I'm a fanboy of open source. But none of the good VSTs support Linux. So the way that their licensing works, it's just a complete nightmare if you try to use it on Linux. So it's kind of a dream of mine, but like I don't think it makes any sense to really choose a DAW because of the operating system, unless it's Mac. That's why I switched off Logic. Ableton's nice.
Yeah.
It's got both. But
yeah, Mac. It's funny because Mac used to be like, if you do audio stuff, get a Mac. Like that used to be the thing, right? And I feel like ever since like Steve Jobs just wasn't him anymore. Yeah. Like it just everything kind of fell to shit.
Yeah. Well, this is a whole conversation in itself, and I have to intentionally fight back my anti-Mac. But I used to be a Mac. I used to have iPad, iPhone, MacBook Air, and that was back in the 2013 MacBook. And I think from a software standpoint, it is better than Windows. It's easier. It's when I say better, it's you don't have to think about as much crap, and you only have so much space in your head. So when a lot of that stuff you don't have to worry about, like drivers and all that crap, it just works. It gives you more time to think about other things. And from a music producer standpoint, that's really good. Plus their audio driver stuff just works, which is really the biggest thing. It's just stable. Core audio. It just works, which is probably where that came from. And to be fair, Windows audio is still a steaming pile of shit. Like it's so bad. It's horrendous.
You have to have an interface. You cannot run Ableton without a fucking audio interface.
No.
You're doomed.
Or not only that, you want to have it's like, oh, you have an interface with 8 inputs? Oh, sorry, you can only use the first 2 for anything in Windows if it doesn't support ASIO. It's like
so stupid. Anyways,
there's probably a workaround for that, but I've downloaded all these random applications to try to figure it out. But from a Mac standpoint, it's just so much easier. There's a good utility called like audio Midi routing, and you can actually do routing and stuff. So Macs are better for that standpoint. But back in 2013, they were making really good hardware, and it wasn't crazy overpriced. And I think that they kind of moved into more of the luxury goods market. They were more focused on the design, which they were always kind of focused on before. But when they're charging 3 or 4 times as much for the same thing you can get on Windows, people that are artists that just they're trying to make ends meet, they're not going to buy the Mac because it just costs too much. And I think that in combination with Windows getting their shit together with Windows 10, it's not the best. Obviously, the automatic updates suck, but it's much better than like Windows 7 is a nightmare. Like I tried using it recently and I was like, oh my God, you have to install drivers. Like what? They should just be automatic.
Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's silly. But it's kind of funny, like a counterpoint on that is like when we're talking about Logic versus Ableton, I find that Logic functions more like a Windows program, and that's why it makes it so much more difficult to do things quickly because you have to go through a bunch of menus. And so like the thing about Mac is like it's impossible to customize your shit the way you want because they don't even have those options for you. Like whereas Windows, every single option is there, and it's kind of a bitch because you have to like know what every single thing does. But if you understand it, you can do anything you want. But and so that's like Logic. Like if you understand every single option, I'm sure it's just as good as Ableton. But Ableton has been simplified to the point where it's like you just kind of do the thing you want to do, and it just does it for you.
Exactly. But at the same time, you can Max for Live. Like you can basically go in and do all that stuff yourself if you want to. You can go way deeper than I'm pretty sure that's definitely like Max for Live is deeper than anything you can do in Live or
100%
in Logic. So
or any other DAW, I think for that matter.
Yeah, or maybe Reaper's like the one exception, but
does Reaper let you do stuff like that?
Well, you said it does crazy routing, right?
Reaper.
Is that one? The one with the cables?
I haven't mentioned Reaper yet.
Oh, maybe I was thinking of another one.
Oh, are you thinking of? Wait, shit. Now I can't remember what it's called. The one that we were talking about first.
We should make notes.
Shit, what was it called?
I thought it was Reaper.
No, it's not Reaper. Reaper is like a normal, like broken down version of Pro Tools that's good for Windows. It's a free
it's free,
audio
okay,
program.
yes. I
It's
don't
like
even know.
one step above Audacity.
Well, if you listen to us, you'll know what we were saying, but we've completely forgotten. It's the one.
Yeah, it's the oh fuck, now I can't even remember.
It was the first one we talked about.
Yeah, it's the orange dots one. DAW. I'm just gonna search DAW on Google. Let's see.
Bitwig. Nope, that's.
It's not 10 best DAW apps for recording and production today. I'm sure I'll find it. I just literally can't remember the name of it right now.
How do we forget? But this is.
Oh my god, they don't even have it.
This is why you want to simplify your life when it comes to computers, because you can only fit so much stuff in your brain. Like, we just forgot what we were talking about.
Reason.
Okay, I think we said Reaper when we were talking about it.
Did we? I meant Reason. 100%. I meant Reason.
But yeah.
Jeez. That's hilarious.
Anyways.
Yeah, Reaper is another one that I was going to mention. It's a free DAW that you can download for free.
Really?
Yeah, it's actually free now. But it's actually got a decent amount of shit on it. Like, if you don't want to spend any money and you want to get into audio production, just download Reaper. It does pretty. It's like it's better than GarageBand. Like, it's pretty much like it's almost like Ableton, except like just broken down a little bit, you know. But it's got a bunch of effects in it and stuff. Like, you can do some fun stuff.
Well, you can probably learn most of what you need to. You could probably spend 6-8 months in something like that, and it's actually, I'd highly recommend that for anybody, because it's worth trying things out and doing that before you dive in. Like, you know, I thought you
just said before you die. I was like,
yeah, I'm getting serious with you guys.
It's worth doing it. Should be on your bucket list.
But like with interfaces, for me, I'm just now buying. Like, I'm probably 5 years into music interfaces, and I've just bought exactly what I want now. And I went into getting like a pro interface. And if I'd bought what I wanted, if I had said, oh, you know, I want to be a music producer, I'm going to buy this one, I would have been completely wrong. So sometimes it makes sense to just try out the free alternative to you know, dip your feet in the water, see if you even like that kind of production. So
before you die.
Before you die, before my lungs cease functioning. Dude.
Whoa.
I biked earlier, and then I told Mike, I'm like, look, if you make me laugh, my lungs, because I bike really hard and my lungs like suck from after it. I do have like mild asthma. And then he said like some really stupid word. Perth. Started laughing, and I immediately was hiccuping for like, luckily it actually ended just before the episode.
It ended right before we started, but damn, those are some heavy hiccups.
Yeah, well, the worst part too is when we are setting the podcast up, I have to listen to a monitor mix to get everything dialed. So when I hiccup, I hear my hiccup 200 milliseconds later echoing. So it's like when a hiccup's like, like it's all these really annoying things. And then I laugh because that's funny, and then I hiccup again. That's a nice little feedback loop.
Yeah, it's a danger. And then we actually got a pretty intense feedback loop when we opened up Discord for a second. That was great.
Yeah, we should record that sometime. I think that was that Discord? Yeah, it was Discord.
Yeah, that was fun stuff.
Yep.
Anyway, off-screen stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, coming back down to it, the other ones that I know about are Cubase. Actually, a friend of mine uses Cubase.
I know a lot of people that maybe, I don't know anybody, but I heard that people potentially use Cubase. As soon as I said that, I'm like, actually, I don't know anybody. I think I may have at some point, but it was a while ago.
It was, it's you'll find a lot of the older cats use Cubase still.
Yeah.
Anyone who's been in the game for a long time is probably using Cubase.
They're dialed into their setup.
Exactly. That's one of the things, right? And it's like there's no reason to switch if you already know your way around it, because you've spent all this time learning it, and then you know how to use it. So you might as well just keep using it.
Well, it's like if something came out that was better than Ableton, it would be hard for us to switch, you know, because we have all this preset. It would be very difficult.
Yeah. And I mean, even when Bitwig first came out, I mean, I was kind of excited to try it, but then it eventually, like, when it did come out, like, and when it came down to it, like, Ableton was just better still, and I never ended up even making the switch to try. I've never even tried. Did I say Cubase again? I meant to say Bitwig.
No, you said
Bitwig. I did say Bitwig.
You said Reason.
Did I say Reason?
No.
Oh my god.
I'm just
Bitwig. Bitwig. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm not insane. All right, I got it.
Yeah.
No, you said Audacity. Yeah. Windows Sound Recorder.
Windows Movie Maker. I only make sounds with Windows. It's actually a great granular synth. You just.
Are you serious?
No.
Windows Movie Maker?
No, I have no idea. You probably could do pretty crazy granular synthesis just by like recording a video and then making the video like 2 or 3 frames and then just like duplicating it a bunch of times.
And then render the video and then turn the video into just audio.
Exactly, yeah.
It's worth a shot. I've done some crazy stuff like that before.
Well, if you want to be truly unique, you got to use Windows Movie Maker.
Use Paint.
There's no
Use
audio.
Microsoft Paint.
Yeah. Anyways.
Actually, funny enough, there was a bug in Microsoft Paint way back in the day. If you took a screenshot of a YouTube video
Yeah.
and then pasted it into Microsoft Paint and then pressed play on the YouTube video on your browser, the video would be playing in Paint and you could
What?
draw on top of the video.
Is that okay? Did you watch that on April 1st?
No, I did it by accident.
What? That's crazy.
Yeah, 100%. I wonder if it still does it.
That's a kind of a crazy bug for a program that only does not animated things. You're now
I know.
displaying an animated video.
I did not understand it, but I was literally drawing on top of a playing YouTube video.
That's like copying audio from like a YouTube video and then it just playing video in Ableton. It's like, oh, a video just pops up.
Which Ableton does have that feature, but I
Yeah.
understand what you mean. Like throw it in like an MP3 file, and all of a sudden it's like playing video. Like what?
Exactly, yeah.
Whack.
Very whack.
So, MIDI versus audio.
Yep. That is we definitely covered everything. It's getting back to, was it Chihuahua and the
It's
other
like
one?
comparing a Chihuahua to a. Oh God, what was the other thing?
Reason.
The reason. There's no reason to ever Chihuahua.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really it. We didn't really talk about anything important, but we talked about how we
But it's all important.
it's all important, especially the meandering conversation.
100%.
What are you doing this week coming up?
Actually, I gotta finish up my set for the little show that I'm playing.
Got a question for you about that, by the way. Nate was wondering if you're going to be playing some songs that we worked on together, potentially.
I definitely might be.
Nice. I'll pass the information along.
Yes, definitely. It's gonna be a lot of. I'm gonna try to play as much unreleased stuff as I can.
Cool.
But yeah, it's a short little set.
How
for,
long?
For Sosa, it's just a half an hour. I'm playing
Okay.
for.
Yeah. You have trouble fitting your songs into an hour, so that's gonna be. Just play them at double time. Just turn your sample turn your sample rate to 96 kilohertz, but leave it in 48 in Ableton.
Yeah, and play everything like an octave lower than it's supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. 250 BPM. That's where it's at. Yeah.
250. Oh God. Oh, you want me to double? You actually do want me to double time it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, that way I can play like twice as many songs if they're all twice as fast. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. You play an hour-long set in 30 minutes.
Right. And then I'll just tell everybody to record it and then play it at half speed and enjoy the full experience.
I was literally going to say exactly that. Yeah.
But they have to record it at 96 kilohertz, otherwise it's going to sound weird.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to stream.
So
in
get your
60.
interfaces ready.
Yeah. Get your interfaces ready is something you should tell to every Twitch viewer.
Yeah.
Like people have their audio.
Go buy another computer. Make sure you route it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that'll be fun.
You're doing that, and when is that? Thursday, Friday, Saturday?
I think it's on the 18th. I don't know what day
Okay.
exactly that is. I think it's a Friday.
Friday. Cool.
No, it's a Saturday. It's a week from today.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, a week from today that festival's happening. Festival. Oh yeah.
Yep.
And then I've been mad. I gotta actually have to work on a remix for Big Gigantic.
And you're done with the Mr. Bill one? That was.
I am almost done with it. I think there's a couple things that I'm gonna fix up and change and edit and just try and make a little bit better. But at this point, it's done enough that I can send it off to him and be happy with it. So I'm just waiting to see him stream again, and then I'll send it over.
Cool. Got to get the reactions.
Yep, that's the thing, right? Because everyone's been waiting for me to do it, right? And I really wanted to finish it in like a couple days, and here it ended up taking like 2 weeks. But
That's still very fast for how complicated it was.
is it? I don't know. I feel like it's slow sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know. Like it would have taken you 1 week it would have taken you a couple days if you did one drop, but you did like 3 basically. Because that interlude section is like cooler than most songs I've ever made.
That's so funny.
The old glitch section.
Yeah, that one was fun.
Yeah.
But other than that, just working on music. What about you? You got anything going on?
Well, you can probably tell by
I see
this,
that your desk looks weird.
Yeah, this is I've got a little bit of a green screen, more of a green desk going on. I've been messing with those graphics OBS shaders. You can actually create custom shaders, and I've been making weird visualization stuff with a green screen and my mixers and whatnot. So I'm just doing my like Ableton Live set with my APCs, but then doing some weird green screen stuff. So I've been streaming that, which has been fun.
Yeah, it's definitely really cool. You should check it out.
Yeah, it's and it's cool because it's like it's not just the video or it's not just audio. I actually have like something that's somewhat interesting to look at.
It's the age of interestingness, right? Everyone's got to be entertaining somehow now that everyone's stuck at home, right?
Exactly, yeah. So it's trying to make it somewhat bearable, and I'm streaming that on Twitch. Probably, I've been trying to figure out a schedule for it. I think once a week is too much because it's not that I can't do it. It's just that I don't have enough fresh music to do it every week, and I don't really want to just repeat myself. I don't mind doing that, but I kind of want it to be fresh every time I do it.
Yeah, at least one new song.
No, like so far I've done 4, and they've all been completely different genres of. Well, when I say completely different genres, most people would say they're just house, but for me they're very different vibes, like a whole different track list. But I think I'll probably do it bi-weekly, and I'm gonna try to set a schedule for it. And I should be able to, because I need about 20 songs, 25 songs, and then that's good for an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet.
I thought you froze there for a sec, but you were just.
Oh yeah, no, I just haven't moved.
I'm just so solid. Yeah.
I am solid.
Not gaseous.
What? Not porous.
No,
absorbent
solid.
and yellow and porous is me.
No, like gas versus liquid versus
Oh, gaseous.
Solid.
Yeah.
Gaseous.
Well, let me just sublify here.
Isn't it sublimate?
No. Yeah. Sublification.
Subliming. That's a sweet word. When I heard that in chemistry, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, I was like, wait, something can go from a solid to a gas?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's called exploding.
What? Solid to...
Well, if something explodes, it would go from a solid to a gas.
Yeah, vaporizing. Yeah.
Vaporizing.
Okay, well, I think on that note, our conversation has devolved fully. Thanks for listening. If you are listening to this, you should check out our sound design challenges that we've been doing. We're doing them Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. We are thinking of doing some kind of a competition, so you just have to record a little video. It can be as crappy as mine because I do mine in like 10 minutes. But it's more about the idea, so just...
Yeah, we want to see what you can make.
Check that out on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, if you're so inclined.
Yeah, if you're so inclined. That one might die, but we'll see.
We'll see. Every time I open up that application and it blasts some audio at me full screen, I'm like, I get one step closer to uninstalling that app.
Yeah, it is a black hole, that app. I understand why it's very enticing for people who have extremely insane needs for like short attention span, like gratification.
The trick is to mute your phone audio before you open the app. I have like a checklist, and it's like, okay, post Instagram, and then mute phone, post on TikTok. Works pretty well. So,
gold. All right.
Well, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.